I call to order the City of Bloomington Board of Zoning Appeals for October the 20th, 2022. Roll call, please.
Here.
Burwell.
Here.
Coyne. Ballard.
Here.
Klepper.
Here. Okay. We do not have any meetings, meeting minutes for approval this month. Reports, resolutions, and communications.
We do not have any reports this month.
Okay. So the petitions to be continued are AA-17-22, Joe Kemp Construction LLC and Blackwell Construction Inc., CU-22-22, Mark Figg. And this evening's docket has two cases. Petition V-27-22, Cutters Kirkwood 123, LLC, and V-45-22, Douglas Wissing. So we are, this is a continued case. This first case is a continued case. Will we have a staff report first?
We have a brief, staff addition, I think, from Director Robinson, and then otherwise it will be, there was a new memo from the petitioner in the staff report, so you'll be able to ask questions about that. And you will also, Mr. Rooker can correct me if I'm wrong, but vote whether or not to give additional time again to the petitioner.
Okay, thank you.
Board, BZA members, my name is Scott Robinson. I'm the Director of Planning and Transportation.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Or you're actually you're not, you're just as
I do,
staff.
but yes.
As always, right, Scott?
I take this opportunity to speak to you tonight. I haven't had a chance to do that very often, and I want to thank you for your time. And I understand sometimes cases come before you that are difficult to make decisions. The BZA do have strict criteria that staff uses in the Unified Development Ordinance, and I encourage you to use that criteria in your decision-making process. And I know the case before you tonight, there are arguments that sometimes lie outside of those criteria, and it's difficult to make those decisions, and we understand that and respect that. However, that platform for those decisions, those policy decisions, should be made at the Common Council or Plan Commission. We've been in the process of updating our code on a very regular basis. And so those sort of decisions are things that staff are happy to take forward and consider those. So some of the things that are being discussed and thought about for this case and perhaps others are things like ownership. You know, do we encourage ownership, home ownership in the city? Yes, we do, but can we legally regulate ownership? No, we cannot. Those are decisions that we cannot make any decisions based on ownership. We cannot legally require ownership in any way, shape, or form. It violates Fair Housing Act. But that doesn't mean that those are decisions that we can consider for other types of things outside of the BZA. We get a lot of pushback about standards in the code about why we do certain things, and one of them in particular over the years is about how much non-residential uses are required on the first floor. And we have evolved over time and will continue to evolve over time. And again, based on the current criteria and standards in the UDO, that's what staff is basing their recommendation on, and I encourage the board to consider that. I do know that there continues to be concerns with non-residential uses on the first floor, how much commercial space is allowed, and those sorts of decisions. Now, given that, the petitioner has spent a lot of time to consider some things maybe outside those bounds. I certainly request that the board vote to give the petitioner opportunity to provide additional information that wasn't included in your packet this evening. But I did just want to take an opportunity to help clarify the challenges before you in this case. I know that because of quorum and other things with other members, it's been difficult. There's 4 of you, and we need a decision, a recommendation on this case before you. So I just wanted to take that opportunity to help, and if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer that. I know staff has presented this case a couple of times and information. So Jackie, is there anything you would like to help clarify?
I don't think so. I think we are just trying to, having internal discussions about kind of what more maybe we could provide analysis-wise that we maybe didn't communicate fully at some of the other hearings, that it basically just boiled down to, it seems like, and even in some of the additional information the petitioner has submitted, that the argument is based on that the use that they desire can't be successful here without additional parking, and that the 50% non-residential inhibits that additional parking, so they need it to be smaller. If we want to, and that based on some comments we've heard at these hearings, that some board members have, seen that as kind of like a logical a way to think about it. But if we want to incentivize owner-occupied downtown and prioritize the parking over space for non-residential uses, that's a policy decision that has to be made and discussed at the Plan Commission level and then council, not something that the Board of Zoning Appeals should be weighing, that they think that the use is valuable enough that the rules should be varied because of the value of those uses. So we think that some of the discussions that have been had have kind of been based around that as opposed to the actual characteristics of the parcel. The argument should be that that there are practical difficulties in the use of this parcel because of the characteristics of the parcel, not because of the rules in the code. So we are just kind of trying to bring that back to what the Board of Zoning Appeals should be looking at. If you all, think that parking for this type of owner occupants or type of residential should be prioritized, that's something we can discuss at the Plan Commission level or, write to our council members about, not something that should be addressed with particular variances for particular sites. And I just hope that we have conveyed that well enough. And so that was something that we wanted to kind of hit on. And yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
So Scott asked about questions. Are we allowed to ask questions to a report?
Well, typically, so staff just gave a report.
you
We
wanna
are
wait till
kind
the
of
end?
outside. Let's,
Yeah, I didn't know if this was different.
if you want to ask Scott a question now, I think it would be
I
fine.
just wanted him to clarify. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the UDO has stipulations on development in a particular manner, parking, whatever, and then we get petitions, and we listen to those petitions, and we may say, that just seems really strict or really odd. If there's not a really clear reason for the variance that's based on that property, you're saying that it's improper for us then to go counter to the UDO. Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, the strict application of the code does, that's what the variance requests are. And again, when we're looking at the physical constraints of the site, those are the things where the strict application of the code, would justify the deviation of the code. When you start getting into the areas of policy questions, that's where we need to change the rules of the code. And so this board is quasi-judicial. You're somewhat bound by those rules to make that decision in your decision-making process. I'm not here to tell you to interpret the code one way or the other. What we're trying to convey is that these questions being presented before you feel policy-related, and that's not really the role of the BZA, is to effectuate policy change through your decision-making. We are asking you to look at the criteria and use that in your judgment.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, make sure I understood it. Thank you.
Okay.
And again, I would encourage the board to vote to give the petitioner an opportunity to ask additional questions and the additional statement that they provided. So,
Okay, thank you.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. So we are back to the board for consideration of additional time for the petitioner.
I was going to move that we give the petitioner 20 minutes, up to 20 additional minutes to present.
Okay, can we have a vote, please?
Ballard,
Yes.
Clapper,
Yes.
Morrell,
Yes.
Buckmore,
Yes.
Okay, so the petitioner, if they could please step to the podium. You're up.
I can remember when we used to have an overhead projector and none of that was
Me
set
too.
up. You still have one?
Okay. Could you please state your name?
I am Randy Lloyd, and I am the petitioner.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, you have up to 20 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and Scott, thank you for supporting the additional minutes. It is my hope that you have had an opportunity to go over the memorandum that Christine Bartlett, who is here and will be up momentarily, have had a chance to review it. And I would just wanted to add a couple of quick comments. And I think it's hard to parse when we're having these conversations about what's policy and what's not. We've tried to put together a memorandum that is based on fact and evidence and based on current standards that we believe are pertinent to the BZA specifically. And what I'd hope we can do is convince perhaps Commissioner Clapper and Throckmorton, and continue to have the support of Commissioners Ballard and Burrell on this variance, that we've provided the necessary evidence and standard of review that gives you the comfort level to support this variance. And it does at sometimes seem like it's a policy argument, and we're not trying to make it a policy argument. We're trying to follow what are the strict standards of legal review for the BZA. And these are a number of considerations that we feel like haven't been considered necessarily in the past. And so we've tried to put together a memorandum that would provide this type of evidence and support based on both recent case law and existing case law that supports our variance, and would hope that you would find a way to support this in particular. And with that said, I'm gracious to the BZA for the number of continuances you've granted me. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the amount of, and I appreciate staff's time for how much time we put into this. These are important things, and you are an important body. And I determined that I was my own worst client. And with that said, I had worked with Christine Bartlett to try to pull it all together in a way that I thought hopefully would provide the BZA both the comfort level and sort of the hook to hang your hat on to approve this variance. I can't do this project without parking at this location, and I have no other location. And we hope we've laid out a case to demonstrate that to you that complies with the law and doesn't just seem like it's a policy argument. But so with that said, Ryan Strasser is in the netherworld, but he's here. He's on Zoom. So if there's some questions about those particular things, and there may be an opportunity for him to chime in. But at this point, I would like to introduce Christine Bartlett. She is counsel for us, and to sort of highlight some of the key components of the memorandum, answer any questions about that, and then we can talk specifically about any other questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to pause their time for a moment. Can we get
Christine,
these
can you
on?
wait a second? I'm going to see if I can get these screened.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that. Okay.
There we go.
We're good? Maybe. All right, I'm Christine Bartlett with Ferguson Law.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
I thought what might be helpful tonight would be to go over the factors, because there is a clear set of factors under the law that you need to review and make findings about. And there's been some confusion about those over the meetings, which is pretty easy to see why. It's supposedly a 3-factor test that's really more like 7 or 8. So I just wanted to go through those. If we could go to the next slide. So the first part of the factors test comes from your UDO, which originates from the Indiana statutes. So that includes items 1 through 3. The approval would not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. Number 2, that the use and value of the areas adjacent isn't going to be affected in a substantially adverse manner. And 3, that the strict application of the UDO will result in practical difficulties in the use of the property, and that the practical difficulties are peculiar to the property in question, and that the variance will relieve the practical difficulties. So obviously that key phrase there that needs further explanation, and where we get the other sub-factors, is from Indiana case law, and that's the practical difficulties. First, it's really important to note that it's not a impossibilities standard. It's not practical impossibilities. It's practical difficulties. The petitioner absolutely does not need to show that this would be impossible without a variance, just that it would make the development of the property in the way that the petitioner wants to do it difficult, more difficult. So when looking at the practical difficulties standard that's been in place since 1985, and parts of it longer than that, there are 3 other things that you look at: whether there would be a significant economic injury from the enforcement of the UDO to the petitioner, whether the injury is self-created or self-imposed, and whether any feasible alternatives are available within the terms of the ordinance, which would achieve the same goals for the petitioner. So going back to that second one, when we talk about self-created or self-imposed injuries, the courts are looking as to whether the petitioner did something to make the property out of compliance. So for example, there's a case where the property owner sells off half their property, and then they come begging for a variance because they can't do anything with their property anymore. That would be a self-imposed or self-created injury. But on the other hand, the cases have said the petitioner doesn't have to take affirmative action to avoid the need for a variance. So for example, in kind of an extreme case, in one of these cases, the petitioner wasn't expected to buy up neighboring properties to avoid the need for a variance. And then looking at that final factor, going back to that, it's really important to note that it's not whether any alternatives exist for any development. It has to be a feasible alternative, and it has to be a feasible alternative that achieves the same goals as the landowner wants to achieve. It's not just, well, you could develop something else here. You could do something totally different. The variance review process requires that the petitioner's proposed development goals be given deference. It's, can the petitioner do the same thing that he wants to do within the bounds of the UDO? And here we've set forth a memorandum going through each of those factors, and we've provided either facts that you've already seen, new facts, we've got new statements going through each of those factors. We're not telling you to avoid or disregard any of those factors. We believe we hit every one of those factors on the mark. We've also provided proposed findings, and I'd like to go through those just quickly, if I could. So on the first one, the approval will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. In this case, we believe granting the variance will actually help achieve the goals of the comprehensive plan and add density and diversity of housing downtown by adding owner-occupied condominiums. Factor 2, city staff agrees on this one, so I won't belabor it, but there wouldn't be an adverse impact, and actually granting the variance should increase the neighboring property values. The third factor, which is really more like 4 factors, The petitioner hits the mark on all these as well. Not allowing the ground floor to be used for parking will effectively prevent this project from being developed, as the goal of the petitioner is to build residential owner-occupied condominiums. And as we've provided from statements from realtors, this just cannot be done without providing parking on site. So not approving the variance will result in a significant economic injury. If these condominiums were still built without the parking, they would not be marketable. They could not be sold. The injury is not self-created because it wasn't the petitioner's actions that put the property out of compliance with the UDO. A new UDO was adopted after the petitioner owned the property. It results from the language of the UDO. And finally, the no feasible alternatives. In this case, there is an issue that is peculiar to the property. It's the difficulty of the grades and the dimensions of the alleys, which are particular to this property, that don't allow for underground parking and don't allow for second floor parking unless you were to have your entrance on Kirkwood, and it would be at a substantially increased cost. It's simply not feasible to provide parking in any other way, and providing parking is the only way that this project is at all financially realistic. So we've provided the memorandum. I'm here tonight to answer questions on that. And we have Ryan Strasser. I don't know if you want him to chime in at this point on anything. But thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Did Ryan want to say anything?
Ryan, are you with us?
I'm on here. I don't really have anything to add at this time, but here, I can answer any questions anybody has of me from technical issues.
All right, thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
Okay. Ryan, let's just swear you in, just so you're available to us to, for questions. Could you just state your name again?
I'm Ryan Strasser with Strasser Construction.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are back to the board for questions of either staff or petitioner at this point.
Well, I can start.
Okay.
I think I appreciate the, first of all, let me just say to Ms. Bartlett, I appreciate the memo, thank you. If I could have you come back, I'd like to ask, I just want to clarify some of these.
Absolutely.
And this may cross back and forth with staff, so I kind of want to keep it simple, you know, because I understand the larger argument. So I'm just really going to focus on the third item in your memo, which was the strict application of the terms of the UDO will result in practical difficulties. On page 2, the first, at the top of page 2, your first sentence there, sub-item B, whether the injury is self-created or self-imposed. You state that it's not. I want to get a clarity on that. Can it not include the development design is creating the difficulty?
I think that would always be the case, right? If you're coming for a variance and you need a variance, you have designed a plan that by definition doesn't meet the requirements of the UDO. So if that was the case, if that was enough to meet the mark, you would never be able to hit it, right? But the cases don't talk about that. The cases don't talk about, well, you've designed a plan, so you have self-created your own problem. What they talk about is it's not enough that you knew what the zoning code even was when you bought the property. That's merely not enough. But for example, like I said, if you take some action after you buy the property to bring it out of compliance to where you now need a variance, if that makes sense. And,
No, it
and there
does.
aren't that many cases, so I mean, we don't have a ton of guidance, but that's kind of where they've talked about it the most.
Your argument makes sense. I am just trying to understand that it sounds like what you're saying is that this is the only type of design that can be built on this property.
I don't know that I'm saying that. I mean, it's certainly the only, I don't know if it's the only property that could be developed there, but the one that meets the landowner's goals to create condominiums and having parking at all, because due to the alleys, we can't have second floor or ground floor.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
No, it does, thank you. The sub-item C there is whether any feasible alternative is available. So if the petitioner were to design it in such a manner that it wasn't condominiums, but instead it was rental without parking spaces, that would be a feasible development.
Absolutely. It just would not be one that achieves the landowner's goals.
Okay. So B and C then really are a little bit more open to interpretation rather than being strict as far as it can't be, it can't be developed and it's not self-created. You would
Right.
accede to that.
There is a lot of interpretation there.
Okay.
And yes, it's kind of all across the board on those cases.
Well, I want to make sure, and those were the areas that I was getting to. On page 6, the significant economic injury, the first sentence, the ability to sell condominiums. So to be clear, the goal and only goal that the petitioner is willing to consider for the development of this property is the selling of condominiums.
That is the plan that is before them. As far as I know, that's Randy's only goal for this property, is he has from the beginning wanted to have residential owner-occupied condominiums here.
Okay, thank you. Page 7, injury not self-created. I do want to clarify that first section there. Partial statement was, it was subject to a different zoning code and did not require these variances. This plan, I understand, was put forth before the UDO changed. However, I want to be clear, I believe the petitioner stated that he let that kind of lapse during COVID. Does the petitioner still stand by that statement? That
I believe it does, and if you don't mind me adding to that, I would just say that would fall into the bucket of the petitioner is not required to take affirmative action to prevent their need for a variance. So to say, well, he could have done this, he could have done that, the case law has said, no, we don't look at what they could have done. We look at, is the need for the variance based on the code? And we also look at, well, did you do something that absolutely required your need to come for a variance, like selling part of your property off, knowing that you would then need a variance to do anything with it?
understood. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? I'll go. Okay. So I actually have a question for Mr. Lloyd. With respect to the self-imposed situation, can you please explain? Let me. I just want to understand in terms of the history of the ownership of the property, because your outfit also owned the CVS property next door, or was that together with this property at one point? It is
Partially.
partial.
I purchased the parking lot and the third floor from a former partner who developed the CVS, and that building is a condominium. So there is now a group out of New York that owns the bulk of the first and second floor of the former Workingman's building, and I've owned the third floor, which I redeveloped into, basically it's 4 office suites. And so the rest of it is, there's some common area that belongs just to the third floor, which is our office suite, which is, if you're facing the CVS, it's the door to the left, or it used to be the way you got up to the commercial loan officers for Workingman's or Old National. The CVS owner, which is a group out of New York, they own, again, that and some common area and the loading dock behind it, and that is their space. And so when I bought the third floor and the parking lot, that lot used to belong up with the third floor, and it was basically was subdivided. I mean, it had to be subdivided to be 2 different parcels, which is what the previous owners did. And so it's 2 different transactions. It's 2 different legal entities.
Okay, at this time,
Yes.
Okay, it seemed very reasonable that access to this property would have come off of Washington, and if this development were to have been anticipated, it seems curious to me that there wasn't an arrangement before those rights were given to the new owner so that access could have been maintained.
Yeah, and
That, I just,
Barry, I think it's certainly a fair question to ask, as I did present it to the Plan Commission, where we originally did have access in the loading zone, not the alley.
right.
And that was,
on the property.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did not own that. I didn't own that. At the time, I'd say, for lack of a better description, just sort of a gentleman's agreement that we were going to work a way out to use that, incorporate CVS's loading dock as well as the trash chutes and everything else. And during all the time that passed, it fell apart. CVS was not in favor of it either, and it just didn't become an option for me. I don't and never had a legal access to that. I had at the time when we were first proposing it, I guess, a gentleman's agreement with the owners that we could, if we got approved, we could figure out a way to do it. But it is, and just to clarify, if you go to the condominium documents, there was not a right that runs to my ownership in the lot for ingress egress, because we always had ingress egress off of Kirkwood in the alley.
Right.
So
Right.
that's what did change about the project, and which was going to drive coming to either the Plan Commission under the old UDO or coming back as we are here with the BZA. So it was never the same owner. I never owned the space behind the CVS. The third floor, never owned it. So there's two entities. There's a Cutter's Kirkwood 121, which is the third floor office suite, and the Cutter's Kirkwood 123, which is a separate legal entity that owns the parking lot. And the parking lot did not have any ingress or egress rights with the owners of the other condominium, which is the CVS, nor does Kirkwood Cutter's 121. I'm not trying to hide any sort of
Right,
access easement
right.
that we may have. We just didn't have it. We thought we were going to be able to have it, and that's what we proceeded on good faith to do it.
So as part of the development group that redeveloped that building, ahead of it being condoed and sold, right? There would have been an opportunity to have created an easement for access.
Well, when I led the acquisition from my old partner, his plan was just to do a big giant residential condominium on the third floor. So I'm the one that developed the office suite, and he's not involved in any of this. So there was, when I bought it, everything was subject to the existing owners condominium association and all the bylaws and everything else. So there wasn't an opportunity for me necessarily at that time to go to the owner in New York, and I also am not privy to the CVS lease as far as what is required and what's not required.
Sure, no, I understand the circumstance
Yeah.
now. I understand the
Okay.
circumstance now, but having been involved for many years with this property and the development, you know, of the property, it just seems unfortunate that the eventual redevelopment of this parking lot wasn't envisioned in such a way to, you know, it seems pretty reasonable that access would have been, you know, a pretty important aspect to looking at the potential of that lot.
And again, we have the ultimate access, which is off of Kirkwood. And we're trying to be cognizant now of the community's desire to have less cuts. The CVS was developed before I bought it. I mean, it was there. They spent a lot of money developing. If you drive by in Washington, you can see the loading dock. They spent a lot of money developing that actual loading dock for CVS. So it was, my acquisition of the third floor and the lot there was already a loading zone there, a loading dock. So it wasn't anything that during the development process of the CVS, for example, said, hey, wait a minute, why don't we do a shared access off of Washington? Because at the time when I looked at it, Barry, before I even developed plans and just bought the parking lot, I mean, we have alley access, you know, off the back, but I have Kirkwood access. And that's more important and more valuable to me than any of the alley access. as I've shown from day one, the first hearing, there's just a lot of traffic in those alleys. And, my preference is to have access off of Kirkwood. It's a much easier and safer access point to me. But I'm not sure if I'm getting to your point, but if I'd had I guess the foresight to know that, we could change something beforehand, before I even bought it, but I wasn't involved in it at that point. That's my point.
Okay, another question then?
Yes.
Another way to kind of look at the project in terms of feasibility in trying to comply with the code and the desires of the area is to see how large of a project you can do, supported by how much parking you can put there in complying. So if you were to do the 50% parking on the first floor, how many parking spaces could you get? And is that, that's another way to go about a project, is, what is allowed there.
And again, everything is in context here. I'm coming with you with a plan that I've spent several $100,000 on that was under the previous UDO. And so that plan and my good intentions to provide a development that I think this community needs and wants and desires versus some more student housing or apartments. So I need that amount of parking for this type of project. If you're asking, if I come back in my next plan and I only have 5 parking spots, it'll be a much different plan than this. Significantly much different. But I have this plan. This is what I've been sincere from day one, from the first time I got the Plan Commission approval, about my intentions to build this project. And it hasn't changed. I'm not considering other projects. And at this point, I need the amount of parking that I need for this project. And I think as Christine not just alluded to, but noted, was that, this is my development goal. This is what I wanted to do on this lot, and this is what I can make work on this lot. And the additional, we note that even the 1,100 square feet of retail spaces that we have, the 2 pods, those are based on, like, for example, my conversations with COC and the memorandum, most of their retail spaces are around 1,100 square feet. So we feel like it's something that's still very supportive of the realm in between the sidewalk and the facade, and still accomplishes all of those. So I guess I'm just trying to say, Barry, is that this is my development plan. I think we've shown, and Ryan talked about, that if we did the 50%, theoretically you could get, maybe 8 spots in the back, but it's still the grades make it. I have to kind of do this Herculean effort even to get it in, just because of where you got to push back at what points and everything else. But it doesn't meet my development goals.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. I have a question for staff then. So to me, this is what the petitioner is asking us to consider is a little different than in the past. I'm trying to understand what makes this case different than somebody else who comes to BZA who has development goals, and for whatever reason needs a variance. And I've always understood the third criteria to have a fairly narrow purview. And while I am highly sympathetic to the position that this petitioner's in with the code having changed, I completely get that. That, and also with his admirable goals for the project, I feel like our purview is fairly confined. And so I'm trying to reconcile the arguments that are being brought forward. And if maybe even Mr. Rooker even could talk to any situation where where it would be permissible to consider the financial aspect or the goals of the petitioner.
Sure. So
that way.
I'll go ahead and address your question about the goals, and then maybe Mr. Rooker can chime in more about the way that practical difficulty is broken down in the law related to the finances.
Yeah.
But yes, it is uncommon and odd to hear the argument being that the property isn't being able to be developed in the way that the petitioner wants and that the development goal should be considered. So think about it. I'm going to give you a couple of different examples. So think about, I just own a single family lot. I have a larger family than I did when I moved there, and I want to have a bigger house than my impervious surface coverage allows. If I come to the BZA and say, well, my development goal is to have more living space for my family, so in order to meet that development goal, you need to grant this variance. That is just not how we grant variances. It has to be about characteristics of the lot. Is it uncommonly small for the area? Is the house size typical for that? It's details and development characteristics of the lot that you should be considering, not the development goal of the petitioner. Similarly, we've seen a variance recently where the development goal of the petitioner was to have signage that just wasn't allowed by code. If the rubric was, well, his development goal is to have a large sign on 3rd Street, so in order for him to meet that development goal, you need to grant a variance, then we would have granted that variance. That's not the standard for granting a variance. It's great, for a petitioner to have a development goal. Yes, he made those goals under a different code. Yes, that site plan expired in 2019. And that is unfortunate for him that then we updated the code and some things changed. But his development goals you can know them and that's fine, but those aren't what are weighed in whether or not you issue a variance. That is not what the criteria says. I mean, if you just try to think about it in other examples, what if he said, in order for this project to meet my development goals, I need to have 80 units. So I'm going to need you to grant me a height variance so that it can be 9 stories tall. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how we grant variances. It's not based on the goals of the person who is developing the lot. When we say whether or not a lot can be developed, it means developed, not just developed to the standard that the petitioner desires. So I think, does that answer your question about, because that kind of guidance was a little different than what you're used to. And then I don't know, Mr. Rooker, if you want to speak to, you talked about it a little bit last month, but about how the financial can be considered.
Sure, we can talk a little bit about that again. And I do just want to, before I jump into that, I just want to mention, the 3rd standard is not meant to be a subjective standard where a petitioner sets their own development goal subjectively, and then you have to determine whether or not, based on that subjective self-set goal, whether or not there are practical difficulties. It's supposed to be a more objective standard than that. So you're supposed to look for objective realities when you're assessing the 3rd standard. Just to piggyback a little bit on what Jackie just said. We talked about this last time, but there is some case law that indicates that when looking at the practical difficulty standard, the BZA can consider whether significant economic injury will result if the ordinance is enforced strictly on its terms. We talked about that last time. You heard Ms. Bartlett talk about that a little bit just a moment ago as well. But then also you're supposed to consider the other factors as well, whether or not the injury is self-created. Joe, you spoke about that a little bit, and also whether there are feasible development alternatives. Does that address what you were looking for, Barry?
Empathetic and sympathetic with the petitioner in terms of purchasing a parcel, having a plan, getting the plan approved, getting designed, spending all the money doing this, and then get caught up during a pandemic and during a Duke redo, Duke Energy redo, and then once he goes to break ground, realizing that now he does not follow the UDO. And I think that is kind of unfortunate when you see this happening. And I wish there's something that we can do to mitigate situations like this. He has spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time and effort doing this. And now here we are trying to grant a variance that it's out of our purview almost to grant. So I don't know. I'm at a loss here. I guess maybe staff has something to say
I
about
have
this.
to clarify, we've clarified this at other hearings, but Mr. Throckmorton brought it up. This site plan has been expired since 2019. So we didn't start feeling the effects of COVID until a year later, until 2020. So I totally understand, we deal with Duke as well. We deal with other downtown projects that just don't materialize because they have too much trouble working with Duke. That is obviously a reality of developing in Bloomington, a reality of developing in a tight space. So I am sure that was part of it. During that 1 year that you have of a site plan approval, you can come back to the Plan Commission and say, I'm not going to get started in time. Can I have a extension? That didn't happen. There was no relief requested that was allowed within code at that time. That's all been over, since 2019. So I just want to make sure that, again, we're trying to focus you on the findings, but just because it has been brought up here now multiple times, this wasn't a project that we saw its expiration happen during when we were all homebound. And, and as we've said before, we also didn't see construction slow down. And obviously we know that it was, that there were issues for construction, but I mean, the number of permits and things that we saw continued. You kept seeing petitions at Plan Commission. We didn't kind of like freeze in time, but it's a little bit irrelevant here because this petition was already expired before that time started. And there was a relief option where they could have requested extension and did not.
Thank you for the clarification.
Can I ask a question that goes off of what Flavia just brought up, which is, when was just so we all hear it in this venue, when was the new UDO passed? What month and year?
Oh gosh, sorry, we've updated it so many times. It was in 2020, April of 20. I want to say it's April of 2020. I'm going to have to look. I'm sorry.
Okay, and while you're doing that, then the second part of that is, my understanding was the discussions about changes to the UDO took place over a course of years.
Yes,
Is that accurate?
that is accurate.
So would it be reasonable then in the staff's opinion, would it be reasonable for someone who's developing a piece of property to pay attention to the UDO updates?
Yes, of course. And I, not to say one way or the other, but yes, of course, we always encourage everyone to be involved, and especially those who are so intimately
Understood.
involved. But yes, April 2020 is the effective date.
Then I will present the same question to Mr. Lloyd. Can you help us understand why the petition that you had originally wasn't updated or continued?
As I explained before, there was a lot of things going on related to this project. Condominium project is very, it has a lot more moving parts to it, and because it's not apartments, financing is highly contingent on your ability to secure at least reservations or pre-solds. And moving up to that point, the Duke issue created a lot of delays. It became apparent that at some point the loading dock may be an issue. And then just working through 14 months with Duke of trying to locate power lines in these alleys took a tremendous amount of time. And with all due respect, this is not the only project I do. I do projects all over the country. And then once COVID hit, financing and interest in sales, while there were still people that maintained reservations, the supply chains were a wreck. Everything related to this project became very volatile. I did mention that and Ryan mentioned previously that, we sort of did in good faith. We installed our water connection and our sewer connections at the request of Public Works. So our intentions were to move forward on the project. And so there were just a lot of things going on at the time that did. And yes, I mean, Jackie's correct. I could have come in and asked for it, but I didn't even know what I'm asking for. I'm still wrestling with Duke, trying to figure out, because the Duke component of this was a make or break. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars to relocate the power poles and the power lines. And I didn't have a budget number and didn't even have a plan for it. And so those sorts of unknowns made it even difficult. Yes, I could come forward in good faith and say, hey, can I have another year? But I didn't. And for your again, just edification, yeah, I know the UDO was changing. I participated on most of the panels and committees to do it. And these are the sorts of things that we also recognized when we worked on the UDO, which is that we're trying to put together the best document we can, and I think Scott would agree that there are going to be times and circumstances where circumstances line up that we just never imagined, like something would quite come together that would challenge the UDO in a way that we didn't take into consideration. The UDO is, it's kind of a living, breathing document, as Scott said, and I think that is worthy of a variance. It's no different than somebody comes up with a development plan where you have a setback and their plan that they developed now needs a variance from the setback. Well, why didn't they develop the plan so it didn't need the setback, variance? I mean, we can say that for everything that comes before the BZA. Everything that asks for a variance. That's why you're here, is because we are seeking variances to something here that makes it difficult. I think Christine has presented a really good argument and case for this, and evidence. This is not anecdotal, but yes, Joe, to your point, I certainly was aware of it, but the circumstances with all the moving parts just didn't lend itself to asking for an extension on something I didn't know how we were going to extend it.
So, Ms. Bartlett, this against to the petitioner, Mr. Lloyd. So I'm referencing you, had mentioned that it was, the issue had to do with the development design. In her opinion, she is not knowledgeable about whether a different design could work on this property. So that's one of the critical issues here, which is you've said that you had a design that was approved under a different UDO.
Yes.
It lapsed. Now you want to take that design that you developed, and you want to ask us then to give you a variance so that you can develop it the way that you want to develop it. My question is there any other way for you to develop this property that's within the UDO?
You mean as I have it designed?
No. Is there any other way for you to use this property and develop it?
Joe, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Why not?
Because it's from the legal standard, it's my development standard that I've brought to the table. I don't have to exhaust what's feasible. Yes, you know the answer to that, Joe. You know you could develop it 500,000 other ways under the UDO.
That would be my understanding. So then from
Yes.
that back to staff, is that the criteria that he can develop it? We have to make a decision based on his criteria for development?
I would say no. I would ask Mr. Rooker to confirm that as well.
Yeah, Joe, I think you heard Jackie and me mention we don't agree with Ms. Bartlett or Mr. Lloyd on that point. If a developer can set the parameters of the developer's subjectively chosen development goal in a narrow enough way, and then if the developer, in this case, they're claiming the law requires the BZA to grant a variance from the developer's subjectively chosen standard. If the UDO creates difficulties, the BZA would effectively be cornered into granting every variance that comes before the body. And I'm not convinced, and I don't think the case law says that the third standard, the practical difficulty standard, works in that way. Does that make sense?
It does. So I have one final question. This has to go to staff. It may come back to the petitioner, but what it's sounding like to me is that this is an issue that's better resolved through legal issues rather than through the BZA, because, this is their central position, which is, this is the way we want to develop it, this is what we've petitioned for, and this is what the law states, and we're also now being advised by staff that this is not what the law states. So there seems to be a legal issue. So how then can the BZA make a ruling if this is a legal issue? That's not what we do.
So, yes, Mr. Rooker can weigh in as well. Obviously, you know the BZA is quasi-judicial. If this variance were to be denied, then there is additional recourse were the petitioner want to pursue that beyond the BZA.
Because we're in a position of we deny it because right now, all of the rules and procedures of BZA dictates that we have to deny this because what's been presented is contrary to what we've been told the BZA's policies are. So to do that, then the petitioner would have to come back with legal action.
Our recommendation is the same as it was in the first packet, which is that based on the information provided by the petitioner, they do not meet the standards that are in the UDO for development standards variance, and that the Board of Zoning Appeals should deny this request. That hasn't changed. Even, there's been more information, there's been a lot of discussion. This request just does not meet those standards. And so, yes, our recommendation remains that you deny it, and then it would be up to the petitioner, and they have opportunity for additional recourse outside of the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Out of fairness to the petitioner, Ms. Bartlett, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you. I do not think that Mr. Rooker is denying that part of the analysis that you have to consider based on the case law is whether there are feasible alternatives which achieve the same goals as the landowner. Excuse me. I think where we're getting wrapped up is it's not Randy's specific plan. Sorry, I'm gonna have a coughing fit here. It's condominiums is the goal. It's not this specific plan. And if you ask Randy, can he do condominiums any other way? Thank you. The answer is no. He told me that as we were sitting down there. He's up here not maybe expressing that as clearly as he is to me, but the goal is condominiums. You do have to consider the landowner's goals, and I don't think that the city is going to deny that that is part of the test that you have to consider.
Thank you.
I just have some brief questions to staff. Just because I think, back to number 3, the significant economic injury, I think that, to me, that carries a lot of weight, and not just in this case. So I guess my question is, if this is denied, then what are the alternatives considering these facts? One, that if it's denied and the project's cut out completely, these investors are not going to simply take a $1 million bath in this thing. They're going to sell it. So if they were to go sell it and recoup those expenses, who buys it, and what are they able to develop under the standards of the UDO that's not creating a significant economic injury? Because to me, the only buyer for this is going to be somebody who's going to do exactly what this group is trying to do. It's not going to be a group coming in there, they're going to maximize their profit. So if this sits empty, if this lot sits empty, that has economic injury to the surrounding area. The development obviously has a very large impact. So can you guys think, I'm just broadly asking, can you think of, this is denied and we're back here in 6 months with another project after they sell it, a project that we would approve, that we wouldn't have a variance on, so we're not here, we wouldn't have a variance on it, that would go through? Like, just what are the alternatives?
Sure.
If this is done and
Yeah.
it's a no, what's the best alternative for relating to the economic injury of the buildings around there, the businesses
Sure.
around there?
I'm
'Cause I
going to
think
give an
that's-
answer you're not going to like, which is that is just not part of what we have to do, is to determine whether or not this use that he wants to do is the use that's going to be the most financially successful on this location. First of all, he uses it. It's not that there's nothing there. There's a park and pay there now. There has been for years. It's not being not used. It is economically producing currently. Whether or not they would choose to sell it or design a plan that meets code would be totally up to them. The code doesn't allow us to make recommendations to you, and I also think the criteria don't allow you to make decisions based on whether or not they will be able to make money or make a future sale financially viable. They will figure that out. That will happen. We don't see lots sit fallow in this area. We've seen tons of redevelopment along Kirkwood in the last 10 or 15 years. That's just not part of what we do, is say that we think it's economically feasible for you to do X, Y, and Z. We are saying that the code allows for other uses and that there has not been anything shown that those uses can't be done, that these variances have to be issued in order for this lot to be able to be used.
Yeah, I think my point is the economic injury goes beyond the project, because what happens, I mean, just the data they brought with commercial space alone, I think the UDO, it cannot be stagnant in an economy that has to be considered, that is radically changing right now, that impacts everybody, especially downtown kind of development. I think that has to be considered, because otherwise, again, I don't think, if you get an alternative, I would think if we deny this and this goes a year from now, maybe we get another group sitting here trying to bring another variance to us, because they're the only group that could afford it, for one, and two, they're going to want to do a very similar thing. So I think that's what I think could potentially happen. And the other alternative is that it is used for parking, but you ask any business around there, what would they rather have, a parking lot or a development? It's going to be a development. Those are people paying good money. They're going to be in the downtown vicinity, using downtown businesses, restaurants. So I think it's not just about, I'm not saying, I understand where they're coming from on their economic impact. It makes complete sense to me. But there's also an economic impact for the rest of downtown if there's not a better alternative presented than this.
Well, he already testified that he could do it as apartments if it wasn't condos without parking. Again, this is more your area of expertise than mine. I don't know what else could go there, but we haven't been presented that nothing else can go there. So it's hard for me to comment on that. And I will say, obviously, open commercial is an issue in Bloomington. This is something we addressed when we did the update. We continue to address it. We're talking about it right now in the Hopewell overlay for the rezone. But along this stretch of Kirkwood, it's not an issue. There isn't. We see constant reuse of those commercial spaces on this pedestrian area along Kirkwood.
I think the economy's changing, and significantly, and I think that needs to be considered, because forcing 50% commercial space when commercial spaces are now becoming vacant and staying vacant, I think that's a dangerous thing to enforce.
And I don't disagree, and that's a policy question.
Right.
So as a
Okay.
member of the Plan Commission, that is something we should definitely talk about, and
Right.
and we are talking about, and you will see when we bring a Hopewell overlay,
Right.
is that does that number need to change? We've already shrunk it. We shrunk it in the 2020 update, and it may need to be shrunk again.
Yes.
But this board can't make that decision for particular spots, is what we're trying to say.
I get that.
Right. Okay, any other questions? Do I go to the public? I want to make sure. Do we go to the public now?
Mr. Rooker, I think they need to go to the public if
Barry,
they...
I would recommend that you offer the public the opportunity to comment, given that we've done another additional hearing on this.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Is there anybody here from the public who would like to speak to this petition? This is your opportunity. If you could please step to the podium. And if you say your name, and then I will swear you in, you'll have 5 minutes just to make your comments.
Hello, is this on?
It
Can you
is.
hear
If you
me?
could speak a little closer?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, my name's Peter Haralovich. I'm a longtime Bloomington resident.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Do you swear to tell the truth,
Oh,
the whole
yes.
truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
Okay,
I
you
swear
have
to
5
that.
minutes.
Okay. I'm a longtime Bloomington resident, and I happen to live downtown. And I've kind of had my eye on this project because I think it's an important project. I would ask a question to everyone in this room. Where can an adult buy a home and live in downtown Bloomington? There are very few options, if any. And this, I think, is a really good, important project. And I think the city and the board needs to find a way to make this work for the developer. I just think it would be a tragedy if it, for whatever reason, is not able to go forward. That's all I have.
Thank you. Is there anybody else here who would like to speak to this petition? Is there anybody online?
There's no one on the Zoom.
Okay, there's no one. Okay, so then we are back to the petitioner. They probably have some remaining time.
Yes, I believe it was about 8 minutes. I'm sorry, I restarted the timer for the...
Okay, okay. Would you like to make any final comments?
I don't. I know everyone's trying to do their best here, and I think what we've presented, it's within the BZA's discretion and ability to grant these variances. I think we've laid out the legal arguments. Christine's done an excellent job with a memorandum. You are a quasi-judicial board. We've presented evidence, and candidly, I think we can anecdotal this all we want, but we've tried to demonstrate that what the standard of review is, what you need to consider and hopefully would consider in doing this, and what I need is a variance. And, what it boils down to is we're talking about almost 3,000 square feet of additional retail space versus some parking spaces that will allow me to sell and build 15 condominiums. And with the types of vacancy rates that we have, the 1,100 square feet is ample space on the two spaces to provide, I think, great boutique types of retail, which as is evident from CFC is viable space to rent. And I think it would be, I've been at this project a long time, and I think it would be a tragedy that we were not able to figure out a way to grant a variance on, what amounts to critical parking for a project to succeed versus 3,000 square feet of retail space. I drive around this community and I see the amount of student housing, the thousands of bedrooms. I mean, look at Kmart, the density there. I've got 15 condominium units I'm trying to build. And I think it's within your discretion and your legal rights as a BZA board to grant this variance. And we've tried to demonstrate that through a memorandum that lays out the legal arguments and the facts, and it supports those facts. And I would respectfully request that you use that power that you have as a BZA to grant this variance, and we can get this project moving forward. I do appreciate your time. I appreciate all the effort and thought that you put to it. I appreciate all the questions you've asked and how you've poked and prod and looked at this in all the different ways. And I hope from all of that, you can just draw the conclusion that this variance is supportable, and vote to grant this one particular variance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I actually have one further question of the petitioner. Is that okay at this point?
A question for the petitioner?
Yeah, I have a question for the petitioner. With respect to other feasible options, Randy, I mean, I understand that you've developed this plan, and this is the plan you would like to build. In access, since the difficult thing about the site, that's unusual about the site, I think that's arguable, is the access. Have you looked at, is there a way to insert a higher level parking above a first floor commercial?
Yeah, so we
I mean, Because you haven't presented, that was something that I had asked about.
Right, and we addressed that in the memorandum.
Okay.
And the additional cost to do a second floor garage, basically above the first floor, and where it would have to ramp from, and that, so that is there, Barry, in the memorandum. I think if Ryan is still on, I think the additional cost, I mean, the cost to do that versus basically because I lose a floor of retail. On basically because right now all I can do is I'm getting the 4 stories under the current UDO because of one of the we're doing all the environmental stuff, which includes placing parking back behind the retail, and so without that I think I'd be subject to other things, but I wouldn't be able to make the economics work paying for a second floor of parking and losing a floor of residential under the current UDO.
And so the current UDO does not allow you to be taller.
It doesn't under we're here actually, even though I had previously designed a 4-story building, we're basically here because we do comply with the environmental components before the UDO change. Is that right, Jackie? I think when we submitted before the affordable housing component became part of it.
Okay.
So we comply with, am I correct, Scott? The sustainable incentives allowed us to present this plan as it is with the 4 stories.
Yes.
So that's
to
how you got the 4 stories originally.
3-story maximum, getting an additional 4th story by doing the sustainable development incentives. You could also pursue the affordable development incentives for an additional story. And the setback for parking is only for ground floor.
Right.
Yeah.
The setback for parking is only for ground floor.
But anyway, Barry, those numbers are in there.
Okay.
And
I saw them.
It just,
Okay.
yeah, so.
So I do have a question. Let's say we do the second floor parking. Can he have a variance for another floor so he can keep the amount of condominiums? Is it feasible to have that would be a practical difficulty for this type of, and he would be allowed to have another floor, an extra floor? I'm just
5
asking.
stories?
Yes.
Yeah, you would have to decide. There are, again, sorry, I think I said, but there are options that allow for a 5th floor now that he isn't pursuing. So, our suggestion, of course, just to any developer saying, hey, I think I might need a variance would be you should look at the incentives first, to exhaust those.
Which I did for this particular plan.
Well, no, he's doing sustainable, but he could also be doing affordable to get a 5th floor.
To get a 5th floor.
Correct.
Help me understand that then. You don't want to pursue the affordable for the 5th floor?
It was.
I want to understand what Jackie just said in your opinion.
Yes, under the development I had with the condominium project that I have it does not have an affordability component to it. I did not want to pursue an affordability component because the economics don't work, just plain and simple. And the 5th story, at least under the previous UDO, I tried to build and propose a 5-story building and was met with a tremendous amount of resistance. And that's why we have a 4-story building now. So whether that, I could get that under, everything else that's current, yes, possibly. But again, I'm just trying to keep things simple. I've spent a few $100,000 on a plan that's 4 stories. I was able to make that component comply with this current UDO through the sustainable incentives, and that's how I tried to keep it simple.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
It was in Ryan's. Okay. So then we are back to the board for action.
Yes, the fifth floor would have to be pushed.
Setback.
I'd have to double check, but I think what Scott was mentioning, which I was just trying to check, is that it would have to be set further west because CVS is historic. How tall is CVS? I'm so sorry. I think it's 3, did you say it's 3 or 4? It's 3 stories. 3 stories, yes. So that would be, they would potentially then be coming to you because they could only go 1 floor or 12 feet more, with the incentives. I'd have to double check on the language.
Okay.
Just a second.
Okay. Any, we can have a motion and then we can have discussion if you want, or unless anybody has any remaining questions.
Sorry, so just to clarify, the first module, if they were to do a 5th floor, it would basically have to be set further west. It couldn't cover the entirety of the footprint, and that's something that we would
Because
work
of the
on.
adjacency to the historic
Correct.
structure. Okay.
Board members, I just want to remind you and everybody else very quickly, this is one of those unfortunate situations where only 4 of you are viewing the petition. State law and the board's own rules require 3 affirmative votes on any item that's brought before the board. So any motion only carries if 3 of the board members vote on it. And of course, there are only 4 participating in this particular petition.
And so, Mr. Rooker, no, so if we do not have a motion that carries, that's considered no action?
That's correct. Until there are 3 votes for some motion, no action has been taken on the petition. That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion? You can start somewhere.
Is this motion for both, are we going to make separate motions on the glass and facade?
You already approved
We
the
already
glass
approved.
last
We're
time.
up, okay.
Yep.
We approved that.
So we're just back here. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
No, it's fine.
Forgot about that.
Well, clarify, this request for a variance has to do with the 3,000 square feet of,
Yes, what you're looking at now is a request for a variance from the 50% non-residential on the first floor requirement.
So if I made a motion to, on V-27-22, to approve the requested variance based on alternative findings as presented by the petitioner?
Would that suffice?
There's Mike.
That would be an acceptable motion, yes.
Okay, do I have a second?
Jackie, I'm sorry, I'm not in the room. It might be helpful to put those on the screen if it's possible.
Yep, we can do that. But put what on the screen? The alternative findings?
The findings that Mr. Ballard has just
Okay.
proposed.
Those are for PowerPoint, remember. Okay, so she'll put those up so we have a motion on the floor.
So it's really the third one, right? Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, the motion has been seconded. Is there any discussion?
Well, I'll jump in with, again, I appreciate the time and attention on the memorandum from the plaintiff, petitioner. My concern is, with this request, is that on item number 3, the statements are in conflict with what we are allowed to do. We are not allowed to consider the finances, and this position of we have to allow the developer, we have to consider it based on what the developer wants, runs counter. And I believe that's a larger policy issue. So we would actually, in committing to this vote, be making a policy decision that I think is better served in planning and through the city. It's not in our purview. So while I appreciate these items, I think these items are much more relevant to the planning side and the city side than to what we as a board are allowed to consider. And because of that, it negates the argument. So I can't vote for it. I can't vote for this motion because the very arguments from the petitioner that state we have to consider the economics, we can't. That there is no other possible way to develop this within his desire. We're not allowed to decide that way. The property can be developed. So the very memorandum that we've been given dictates that I can't, based on what this board does, I can't vote for it. I'm not going to vote against it, but I can't vote for it.
I do want to clarify, and we clarified this previously, but, and Mike can correct me where I'm wrong, but the drill down of the practical difficulties does allow you to consider substantial financial hardship, and then Mike described those 3 caveats to that. So we can do that again if we need to, but just to clarify on that.
I'll just make the plea one more time. I think this needs to go to a different body than ours. This is not something that the BZA should be deciding based on what it is that we're asked to do on a monthly basis.
Mike, are you going to remind us of those 3 aspects? Will you ask?
Sure, yeah. So just as a quick reminder, with regard to practical difficulties, you may consider whether significant economic injury will result if the ordinance, that's the zoning ordinance, is enforced strictly on its terms. You're also supposed to take into account whether the injury is self-created and also whether there are feasible development alternatives.
Okay. I'll say that I'm kind of, my thinking has been along the lines of what Joe expressed. I feel this is a really unfortunate circumstance because I do like the project very much. I think it's a great project in a lot of respects. I think the goals are lofty and admirable. I think it's really unfortunate that there was a approval in hand, and for whatever reason, it was not exercised. There was not a grading permit pulled or an extension of the approval requested. And given my understanding of our purview, I just don't feel like I can vote for this at this time. And I know that Planning on an annual basis has been reviewing the UDO and making substantial changes. So I think that there is a possibility that something could be considered that would address a lot of the discussion that we've heard here about the tenable aspect of commercial, and weighing those against other goals, community goals, which I think having a more diverse housing offerings in the downtown is something that we've been talking about for a long time. So it really pains me not to feel able to vote for a project and support a project like this. So those are my comments at this point. Okay, if anybody is willing to have a vote?
No.
Abstain.
No.
Can I ask a clarifying question then? If this goes,
I will concede that as a board member if everyone else will. Sure, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that's
Discussion's
fine.
good.
That's fine.
there has to be another alternative here, to me. This is too much time, effort, energy for all of us, really, but especially where the petitioner is coming from. If it's denied, are you saying, Jackie, that they could go before the Planning Commission then with the ability to try to change the 50% rule, or no?
What I'm saying is, we as the city, and then the Plan Commission members on the city, and then also it can originate from council members, can look at those requirements and talk about changing them. I mean, we are already internally talking about that because of issues, not this specifically, but, other proliferation of commercial issues that we see in town.
Okay.
Yeah. Did that answer your question?
It did, because to me, my vote is going to be based upon this needs to change. I absolutely believe it needs to change. I think it's a hindrance. I think it is a very strong economic impact. In an ever-changing, we have to consider the economic factors very strongly here, in my opinion, because it affects not just the petitioner or whoever develops down there, it affects all of downtown. And trying to put this amount of commercial space, again, in a changing market, it's going to change even more. I think it could be very dangerous and detrimental to the further development of downtown if those changes aren't made. And I think there's a lot of good reasons the petitioner has given us to kind of support a change like that. So my vote is no, but with a caveat that I would absolutely be at the forefront of a discussion of how to make those policy changes.
So the variance is denied?
No, sorry. The motion was to approve, and that motion did not pass. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We need a motion to deny. Is
Oh, that was to
right?
pass.
That's correct. No action has been taken.
No
by the
action
board.
has been taken?
Yes, we need 3 affirmatives. So someone would need to make a motion to deny, and at least 3 people would have to
Oh,
vote.
I see, because we
if
made
you
a
want-
motion to...
In order for that to be true,
To
what you
vote
said.
for.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So I will entertain another motion.
Put it on me. I make a motion to adopt the proposed findings by the city for V-27-22 and deny the requested variance from the downtown character overlay standards to allow for less dedicated space for a non-residential use other than parking garage use in the ground floor and less large display windows in the first, that part we already approved. Thank you.
Do I have a second? I'll second the motion.
And discussion before the vote, I want to support everything you said. I 100% agree, and that's where I want this to go. Back to the city, back to planning. It needs to be cleaned up. If we made that decision, it opens a can of worms, I think. So I appreciate what you had to say, and I completely agree, because it is a really worthwhile and valuable idea, but the city is handcuffing us here on this.
For all it's worth, I am in the Plan Commission, and I will be bringing this up in our next meeting.
So just to be totally clear, if we vote, so a vote against, or a vote yes on this,
An affirmative vote on this motion
On this
denies the
motion.
variance.
okay, denies the variance, and we really don't have, no action is just the other, would be the other,
Correct.
right? I think so.
Yes.
Yes.
Abstain.
Yes.
Okay, so the variance is denied. That's that. You got a ruling. Thanks. Okay, so please,
A question to the chair.
yes.
May we have a 5-minute recess
Sure,
before we
and
continue?
I will be recusing myself for the next case.
Yes.
So let the record reflect that, and Joe Throckmorton will be taking over the meeting.
Without objection, then we will reconvene at 10 minutes after 7.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Okay, so the BZA is now back in
Recording in
session.
progress.
The BZA is now back in session. Let the record reflect that Barry Clapper, the chair of the BZA, has recused herself from this case and is not present.
That Mr. Coyne has joined us for this petition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
He has, he's here. Welcome. Do we need to do another roll call because of that?
I do not believe so. Usually when we have a member joining late, we just note it for the
Very good.
record.
Thank you. All right. All set? Okay. So what we have in front of us is the petition, let me get the right number, V-45-22, and it is to the staff for a report, please.
Okay, my name is Gabriel Holbrow. I'm zoning and long-range planning for the city of Bloomington. Let me pull up the presentation here. Okay, it looks like it's showing on the screen.
I'm sorry, you're a little soft, hard to hear.
I'll move over a little bit. Okay, hopefully you can hear me okay. The variance request is for 731 West 3rd Street. That's on the southeast corner of West 3rd Street and South Maple Street in Prospect Hill. The property is in the residential small lot R3 zoning district, and it's designated in the 2018 comprehensive plan as part of the mixed urban residential future land use area. The property contains a single-family house with a detached garage. Surrounding properties in the neighborhood also contain single-family dwellings, coexisting with a small number of lawful non-conforming duplex uses. This is a photo of the existing detached garage on the rear of the property, looking eastward from Maple Street. This is part of the petitioner's submission that's in the packet. The petitioner has proposed adding a second story on the footprint of the existing garage. The proposed design is shown here, complies with all UDO standards for height, size, and building design, and received a certificate of appropriateness from the Bloomington Historic Preservation Commission on January 27th. The reason for the variance petition this evening is the one standard that the proposed design does not comply with. The existing detached garage is set back just 3 feet from the east side lot line. Here's a zoom in of that part of it. The minimum side setback for accessory structures in the R3 district, according to the UDO, is 5 feet. So it's 2 feet closer than the UDO would otherwise, than the UDO allows. The existing garage is allowed as a pre-existing non-conforming structure, but the new construction for the second-story addition must either conform to the side setback in the UDO or receive a variance. Here are the findings that staff recommends. For the first criterion, that approval will not be injurious to the community, our proposed finding is that allowing the second story to match the existing setback of the first story of the detached garage will not be injurious. The proposed building will not exceed the allowed maximum height for accessory structures in the R3 district. Although the existing setback does not conform to the UDO standards, it is typical for the neighborhood as recognized by the Certificate of Appropriateness from the Historic Preservation Commission. For the second criterion, our proposed finding is that approval will not result in substantial adverse impacts to the use and value of surrounding properties. There may be some impacts on the adjacent property to the east, such as in slightly increased shade or increased feeling of nearness to the building. However, these potential impacts will be minimal and will not affect the use or value of the adjacent property. The third criterion, as you're familiar, requires practical difficulties in the use of the property, that the practical difficulties are peculiar to the property, and that the variance will relieve the practical difficulties. Our proposed finding is that practical difficulty is found in the 50-foot width of the property in combination with the location and footprint of the existing detached garage. Strict application of setback standards would prevent any increase in the height or footprint of the existing garage, even while increased height and footprint are otherwise allowed by all other standards of the UDO. The existing garage cannot be moved away from the east side lot line without violating the front setback standard. The requested variance would relieve the practical difficulties by allowing for an increase in height, which would otherwise be allowed but for the side setback standard. Based on the report and the written findings of fact, the department recommends that the board adopt the proposed findings for V4522 and grant the requested variance with the condition that the variance approves only the submitted site plan and building design. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone here representing the petitioner or the petitioner, him or herself? Please step to the podium, state your name, and I'll swear you in.
Jane York with Spring Point Architects.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have up to 20 minutes, and the time you do not use in this portion can be used later before we vote.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Gabriel, for your guidance and presentation this evening. I am representing the owner in this variance request who would like to further invest in his property in the Prospect Hill neighborhood. As Gabriel stated in his presentation, the HPC granted a certificate of appropriateness in January of this year. The existing garage was not originally constructed to reflect the architecture and ornamentation of the house on the same property. Could you put up the house elevation photo? The front of the house, yeah. This is the front of the house on the property. The garage in no way reflects the aesthetics or architecture or ornamentation, roof slope of the house. The garage alterations will complement the house aesthetics and roof slope. The garage expansion will provide needed storage as the existing two-bedroom house is short on storage space, as is often the case in the Prospect Hill neighborhood. Before the HPC hearing, the project received unanimous support from the Prospect Hill Neighborhood Committee and a staff recommendation for approval from Gloria Colomb, Historic Preservation Program Manager for the City of Bloomington. The neighborhood committee comments included, "This looks like a very nice improvement to the existing garage," and "Another good improvement for the neighborhood, please approve." In closing, I want to reiterate that the practical difficulty for this property is that the existing garage is located 3 foot from the side property line on a 50-foot wide lot. Moving the structure will violate other aspects of the UDO for the R3 zoning. We believe that this project meets all the criteria for variance approval, and we appreciate your consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. How much time has been retained?
There's a little bit over 17 left.
Thank you. Excuse me. This time, are there any questions from the board for the staff or the petitioner? Seeing none, we will go to the public for comment. Is there anyone in the chamber who would like to come forward and speak? If so, come to the podium, state your name, I'll swear you in, and then you'll have 5 minutes to speak.
I have written comments.
And we can take those from you first. Thank you. And state your name.
My name is Sue Murphy.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
You have up to 5 minutes.
Okay. About those standards, the first one about it being injurious to the welfare of the neighborhood, well, I agree that it's not. However, the approval of this variance will impact me, the adjacent neighbor, and it will affect me in an adverse manner. I am What is considered slightly increased shade and feeling of nearness is, for me, a big wall. It's at least double the height of the existing garage, taller than the house, and it will definitely affect the entire backdrop of my garden and outdoor living space. I'm a full-time resident. I spend much time in my backyard. It's my refuge. Gardening, landscaping is my hobby, and it's a huge source of enjoyment for me. And although it may seem like those 2 feet in question wouldn't make much difference, I'm here to tell you that it does. If 3 feet was okay for a 20-foot structure, then the code would reflect that, but it's 5 feet. The additional 2 feet that the setback standard is meant to ensure would reduce the negative impact of such a structure on my outdoor living space. It provides more light, lessens the feeling of closeness, helps access to the views of the sky and trees, and so on. This petition causes a needless negative impact to me, the adjacent property owner, just to get storage space. I mean, outdoor living space for somebody who has no other option for a backyard versus storage space. You know, I think my backyard is more important than a place for boxes and such, especially since there are, a lot of options for storage. How about the attic of the existing house? I'm not here to, I know it's not my role to brainstorm storage ideas with the petitioner, but I think there are options for that, and there's no option for me and my yard. I have a not a very fancy, here's my visual. This is my yard. You can't see it, can you?
They can put it on a...
Really?
They have an overhead there.
That's my graphic. Anyway, so then there's the part, another thing. So it's my living space, my outdoor living space, and a place for boxes, storage. So the second thing I want to bring up is that, how about putting it further west? How about giving me my 2 feet and abiding by the standard? It could be built with a variance that would not cause a negative impact on any adjacent neighbor. There would be no hardship there. This variance request is for the east and will adversely impact my outdoor living space, whereas addressing it on the other side impacts nobody. So I don't know why that can't happen. So harming my enjoyment of my yard so that a rental owner can create a storage space is not a good reason, I don't think, for this variance to be approved. Then I have a couple of comments about the actual structure. Throughout that whole packet, it's talked about how this is going to be a second floor on an existing accessory structure. The project drawings indicate a staircase, a door, windows, fancy storage space. And so it has to have a pretty substantial foundation. That means that you're going to use the first floor garage. There is a stump from a 5-foot wide catalpa tree lodged into the northeast corner of that existing garage. So, and I believe the structural engineer told me that it was going to be a demolition. And that's different than everything that's written in that packet. There's nothing about, it's all about this existing structure. And I want to know if, for sure, I want confirmation about whether the garage or the first floor is going to be demolished and replaced, or if it's not going to be replaced. So if the existing structure is going to be taken down, can the project still be considered an addition?
That's your time, ma'am.
Pardon?
Your time.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry, your time is up. However, we do have
But I was doing
the
so good.
presentation that you've given us in writing. Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anyone else in the chambers that, from the public who'd like to make a comment? If If not, is there anyone online?
If you are on the Zoom and would like to comment as public comment, please raise your hand or send a message to the Jacqueline Scanlon. Oh, I've got one here. Richard Lewis.
Richard Lewis, would you please state your name and I'll swear you in?
Yes, good evening. My name is Richard Lewis. I'm a resident of the Prospect Hill neighborhood.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I am on the design review committee for the Greater Prospect Hill Historic District, and we did review this item as was mentioned and help forward it on to the Historic Preservation Commission for approval. And the only comment I would have is that if this did involve demolition of the existing structure, I believe that that would have to trigger a new review on the historic side because an addition to an existing structure is a different consideration in our historic design guidelines rather than full demolition and a new construction from the ground up. So I just wanted to raise that point in case that becomes a consideration in the rest of your conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Is there anyone else on the Zoom call who would like to make a comment from the public?
I don't see anyone else.
Okay, seeing none. If there are any final comments from the petitioner or the petitioner's representative, they can step forward. You have up to 17 minutes left.
Thank you. I just want to add just a couple more thoughts. There are a number of non-conforming existing structures in this neighborhood. Just a visual inspection of the half block that this property is located on shows a number of these where, accessory structures are right on the rear property line. Houses are on the front, in the front setback in the UDO. The fact is, this neighborhood and the pattern that was established was created before this UDO and these standards were put into place. To answer the question about the demolition, the owner was advised by the HP program manager that demolition would be possible under the COA and that the entire first floor be rebuilt. It then came to light that this project needed a variance for the location, and that was abandoned. So the first floor will be reused and will remain in place. I believe that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. You may be called back for questions from the board. So we're back to the board for action. We can either ask questions at this point, and if so, we'll do that, and then at appropriate time, we can make a motion.
This question is for the petitioner. So was your first action to ask to demolish the garage and build a new structure when you talked to the HPC?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes. Was your first action with the HPC asking to demolish the structure in the garage in place?
No, it was always intended to reuse the first floor of the garage. The contractor, the owner's contractor, brought up some, the walls aren't very level, which we had accounted for in the garage plans. He can work with the walls the way they are and shim them and get a level second floor. But it was asked of Gloria Colomb whether or not the first floor could be demolished. But that is not the current plan, and it was not the original plan.
Okay, so the HPC gave you a certificate of appropriateness to build a second floor, not demolish the garage, correct?
Correct, and I was not privy to the conversation between Gloria and the owner, but my understanding was as long as the garage looked the same as what was on the COA, it was allowed under the HPC. What would not be allowed is being able to rebuild it from scratch in the current location, which is closer than the 5-foot side setback, which is the zoning aspect or the UDO aspect, rather than the HPC.
So how does that work? Who inspects that and sees that you're not building a whole new structure?
I believe the planning staff has to approve the building permit, and then it is reviewed a couple of times in the building process, construction process.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from board members?
Yeah, I have a question for, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but the adjacent homeowner, Sue? Miss?
We can't have, the public can't be questioned, I don't believe.
no.
All right. Is that correct?
Yeah, the questions can be asked of staff or the petitioner.
Okay, staff, I have a question. Was the adjacent homeowner consulted when the Prospect Hill housing, I don't know, HOA, for lack of a better term, met and decided to give this a thumbs up?
I'm not aware of whether the adjacent property owner was. However, it is, so I can't answer with certainty. My understanding is that no, the adjacent property owner was not contacted. If that's incorrect, maybe someone can correct that. But.
Further questions? I'll go ahead and jump in with one comment and then a couple of questions for staff. The comment is the nearby non-conforming properties is not relevant to the board's action here. That's not part of the consideration. We're looking at the request for variance. My question to staff is this. There was a question presented to us of the foundation heights, whether they were considered. The drawing, according to material in hand, says it does not appear to account for the 18-inch foundation, does it?
Sorry, I didn't actually catch that. Can you repeat the last part?
The foundation heights should be considered. Is the 18-inch foundation accounted for in this building plan? As part of the 20-foot height?
Right, so regarding the height, our understanding of the proposed design of the structure is that yes, it is accounted for. However, in the case that there is a mistake in the drawing and a mistake in our interpretation of the drawing, the 20-foot height limit applies. So, and the petitioner, by submitting the application for the building permit, showing the max height at 20 feet according to how the code measures that height, is committed to meeting that standard.
Okay. Could you help me understand this position that was brought up that the grade of the lot against the grade of the adjacent sidewalk as well as the grade of the adjacent neighborhood should be considered? How's that relevant to the 20-foot height?
I want to make a comment based on the first comment, your comment for questions. You can consider the pattern of this neighborhood and the surrounding environs. That is something that we look at and have looked at, honestly, for variances in this particular neighborhood because so many accessory structures are built on or near side and rear property lines. That's just the way this area developed. That is something that is in the purview. So I just wanted to clarify that, and I can answer any questions.
Well, we have in the past, had other out of code that was used as examples for why it would be okay to then build something out of code.
Yes. So
And
don't.
my point is that just because something in the neighborhood is out of code doesn't dictate that new construction should be out of code.
Correct.
To
yes.
clarify.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now, I've gotten distracted, so I do not recall your latest question. Oh, the grade of the sidewalk. and the grade of the site.
Yeah, just explain that to me, what the question is there as to whether that was considered. The grade of the lot against the grade of the adjacent sidewalk as well as the grade of the adjacent neighborhood. How is that figured into the 20-foot height? Is that important?
Oh, okay, so the 20-foot height is measured from the word in the code is from the average adjacent grade at the foundation. And by average, we mean the median. So we take the highest point that touches the foundation and the lowest point that touches the foundation. We take the midpoint between those and measure from there. So it's measured from where the foundation of the structure is. The height of the adjacent property lines, the height of the adjacent sidewalks do not factor into the measurement of the height of the structure. I do want to point out, however, that does factor into your board's understanding of what the request is and what impact it would have. Or it can in your determination.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Yeah, I have a quick question. For the staff, the proposed second floor, can it be built like 2 feet in, and then they don't even have to come and ask for a variance?
That would be a question for the petitioner. As far as code goes, if the second floor were set back that much, then it would be compliant with the UDO standards, and they would not need a variance.
Thank you.
Further questions from the board?
Yeah, I just have a question for the petitioner. This is for storage? That was just to make sure this isn't like a apartment or something
Along
like that.
with storage, it's just an investment in the existing property. It's also an avenue to bring a really not attractive garage into some complementary aesthetics. So it was kind of achieving several goals at the same time. And can I ask a question of staff? The question about the second floor step back 2 feet, that's still an alteration to the non-conforming existing structure. It's my understanding you still need a variance to any alteration, but you can clarify that.
So I'll
Thank
say,
you.
oh, yeah.
So the question would have to come from the board. Could you please clarify the 2-foot setback?
Yeah, and Mr. Rooker can correct us if we're wrong on that. But if the second floor can meet the setback, then that new portion meets code. I believe that they would be able to do that.
Thank you. Back again to the board for any questions or if a motion would like to be extended.
My last question, does the storage, you're calling a storage area, is that going to have HVAC, plumbing, electric?
It will not have plumbing. I don't know about, it will probably have lighting, yes, electrical. I am not sure about the HVAC. We did not have that in our original plans.
Thank you.
Still back to the board for any further discussion, or the chair would entertain a motion.
If I can, is it okay if I speak, Mr. Throckmorton? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay, so in situations sometimes where we're looking at very tight setback standards, under new construction, we have recommended denial in the past on situations where it's like, you're designing this, take the foot off, that's not ideal for you, but it's so small, you could meet the requirement, please just meet it. Sometimes in cases where we're doing a vertical addition to a structure that already has an established setback, we feel that because second stories and accessory structures are becoming more common, are common in a lot of places, that we take the position that having that wall be straight up is common and typical, and that a variance is warranted in those cases because that building is already there. And I believe Gabriel described a little with some concerns with new construction here would maybe have issues with a front yard setback. And we do, the code and the comprehensive plan do support reuse of structures. So we are weighing those things when we're making that recommendation. So I think sometimes that we differentiate a little bit on properties that don't have existing development and properties that do, and being able to try to use those existing developments in the same way that a new construction would be able to occur, and that then variances are warranted. That's obviously something for you all to weigh. We do have minor modification procedures in the code that would allow some adjustment from that 5 foot that could be done administratively, but they can't meet this. It's not up to this 2 feet. It would just be a percentage of the 5 foot setback, which is why we are here tonight. So I kind of just want to clarify that, because I know we have done other variances where we've recommended denial for these small distances. In cases where the building is already there and the design seems to make the most sense flush, that's part of what we weigh when we recommend approval.
Thank you. I consider that part of the response to Eric's question too, so thank you for the clarification on that. Again, to the board, further questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
I make a motion to adopt the proposed findings per staff for V-45-22 and grant the requested variance with the following condition. This variance approves only the submitted site plan and the building design presented today.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, please call the vote.
I want to make one quick comment.
One comment?
It strikes me that there's going to be a second story here regardless of the outcome here, and that was part of my question for the 2 foot building the second story. So to the adjacent property owner, I think either way, her concerns aren't going to be met. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to ask that question, just to understand that this is going to get built either way. So thanks.
If I understand further discussion on it, you're saying that it can be built within the code and it's going to be insignificant in the difference. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Thank you.
She's going to have a wall to look at either way.
Understood.
Yeah.
Is there any further discussion on the motion before the board before the question is called? Please call the roll. And again, a vote of yes is approval of the variance.
Yes.
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 Motion passes. The petition is granted. Is there any more business before this board? Seeing none, we are adjourned.